in conversation with Matthew Blake, the Managing Director of World Economic Forum, who also heads up everything monetary system and finances. Thank you very much, Matthew, for talking to Money Control. Very interesting times. I mean, tariffs and retreating globalization efforts, independence of central banks, inflation worries, all this have been constant themes for the last 12 months. Can you take us through what we should expect in the next year or so for the global economy?
Sure. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I think you've listed the wall of worries.
Wall of worries is a good way of putting it.
But in reality, we've had a really robust global economy, growing at roughly slightly more than 3%, and with inflation relatively tame. So there's actually quite a pocket of optimism out there too, which I don't think we should fully discount. It's certainly a complicated geopolitical environment, and you touched on several factors there that are emanating from that reality. Our president and CEO, Borja Rende, said he sees this as the most geopolitically charged and complex time that we've seen in a number of generations. He actually cites since 1945, which is a really stark analogy there. But the forum as a independent and impartial platform serves a really important moment here today and into the future in a way that we're able to bring leaders together across the public and private sector. We have almost 3,000 leaders here with us over the next few days, roughly 1,700 business leaders. I think it's like 850 CEOs. And then we have the official sector too, with hundreds of ministers and almost 70 heads of state. So we're very well positioned to have some open discussions. I think we'll learn a lot as the week goes through. There are certainly headwinds out there, the tariff situation, and some escalation there between Europe and the US, how important countries like India fit into that broader global context, given the fact that India is very interestingly positioned, able to work with a number of different major powers, and is a major power on the ascent on its own. So I think we will learn from this week. We'll have some of those core concerns and also opportunities put more plainly on the table. And we're looking forward to an exciting few days here.
Right. Do you think this can perhaps become the venue where a lot of solutions are reached at, because so many heads of states are coming, Trump is expected?
I think I think in a complex time, I mean, the word that gets thrown around all the time by CEOs and policymakers, and it's a fair word, is this notion of uncertainty. There's so much ambiguity out there. So if you're running a large business or a small business for that matter, or you're certainly, sort of a head of state, this not having clarity on some core issues is a major headwind. So
makes it hard to deploy capital.
Absolutely. I mean, in financial terms, for sure. Uncertainty, what do people do during periods of uncertainty? They step back, right? But I think at the same time, we've dealt with that for some period of time here. I think this last year, 2025, also the word du jour would be uncertainty too. So I think business leaders have learned to contend with that, and the pieces are becoming clearer. But in terms of a platform, I think we play a really vital role in an environment like this, because there's not really another parallel organization that can bring people together at scale. And that's here at the annual meeting, but it's also at other gatherings throughout the year. And we have a very robust program for 2026. And it's also within our thematic strategic content work that we build out as teams.
Right. If I look at the chief economist's outlook, they have flagged debt and asset price risks as key concerns. How close is the global financial system to a stress event?
It's there are many pundits out there that would try to answer that question. I'm not one of them. I think it's almost impossible to predict these types of things. But I will say that corporate balance sheets have proven very resilient. I think the corporate sector remains in relatively good shape. Conversely, government, sovereign balance sheets are a bit more of a mixed bag. There's a lot of debt out there. And I believe the IMF projects by 2029, debt to GDP on a global basis will be, this is sovereign debt, public debt, will be at roughly 100% of GDP. So that's concerning. Why is it concerning? In a stress event, in a time of stress or economic downturn, governments need to often issue debt to help provide and smooth the economic outcome. So if bond markets are already saturated with sovereign debt, there may be less buyers out there interested in buying that debt or any future debt. So that is a fundamental question. I think for India in particular, I was looking at the debt to GDP. It's still, compared to other major economies, modest, roughly 80-85%. If you look at Japan, it's very much beyond that. And so it's very difficult to predict at what point in time there's an inflection point. But nonetheless, I think there are positives and negatives in the global environment.
Right. And, in a world moving towards a more fragmented financial system, do you think capital also will flow along geopolitical lines?
We are seeing a more fragmented environment for sure. We're seeing that in a manifestation of different payment rails. So these are ways of moving money that reside outside of sort of dollar-denominated payment rails. We are seeing, regionalization in a way where, take Europe, for example. I mean, there's an imperative for the European Union, which has been in place for a number of years, obviously, but to work more closely together in an integrated way because the context around it is shifting so dramatically and it needs to be more competitive. And then more recently, you see really interesting developments with Canada and China, strategic partnership there that was announced, deepening of a strategic partnership. And I think this is all indicative of the realpolitik that the world is confronted with now. And here, too, that adds complexity. I think if you're a financial institution, also receiving directives from your government where you're domiciled to say, hey, you need to make certain investments within your country to ensure that we are competitive vis-a-vis others out there. I think that more proactive government stance is a feature of the future. And so that is a bit against the more globalized free flow of capital. It will probably raise the cost of capital over time, but we have to see how things play out. It's still early days on these discussions.
Right. Which brings me to my next question. For emerging markets like India, does this fragmentation create opportunity?
Well, I think it could. It could. But it also might lead to a situation where hard choices need to be made. So if there are alliances that need to be drawn, and India, I think, historically has been a very powerful developing economy on its own, but it's also benefited from relationships with the United States, relationships with China, relationships with Russia. So its ability to be positioned in a more agnostic, sort of geopolitically agnostic way has benefited the overall economy. But if you find yourself in a situation where a country like India needs to make a choice, the analyses that we've run say that actually will be detrimental to the Indian economy. It will take some time. It will shave off GDP, so it's negative. But the economy would adjust over time. But I'm not sure it's a clear-cut picture. We have to see how things play out. Obviously, there's a lot of moving pieces there.
Right. And with respect to the friction that we are now seeing between the US and NATO allies, is it going to be a big setback to the global economic order as well, as you see it?
Well, I think what we're seeing, interestingly here, we haven't seen tit-for-tat retaliation in tariffs up to this point. There are a couple of exceptions to that. China, U.S., that dynamic is an exception to what I just described. But more broadly, it's been mostly one way, where the United States has put tariffs. What you're hearing now from the EU is a package that is more retaliatory in nature. And that's specific to tariffs, but it's also with specific to cross-border investments. And so that's an escalation. That's an escalation. And I think here at our annual meeting, we, as I mentioned before, we have a tremendous presence from the public sector. We have all of the relevant actors there. I think there will be a lot of discussions about the path forward with respect to economic relationships between the U.S., the EU, the EU, China, like across the board, because we're a global platform. But nonetheless, I think this week is going to be pivotal for those discussions because all of the actors are here with us and we're able to create, hopefully, a safe, constructive space for productive dialogue on those issues.
And how will this impact the role of the US dollar? Will it continue to underpin the global economy?
The dollar, I think one of the features of the global economy has been the prevalence and the important role of the US dollar. What we've seen over the past 20 years is that within central bank reserves, the dollar has, in terms of its size of an overall proportion, has been going down. It's roughly 58% these days, maybe give or take a percentage. It used to be over 70% about 20, 25 years ago. But, you know, when you think about global payments, when you think about new technologies like stablecoin issuance, these still are dominated or dominantly focused on U.S. dollar as the underpinning. So, you know, it's a really interesting question. I think the dollar's role in the financial system will remain. It's not like it goes from one day to the next and there's a pivotal shift, but we are seeing a gradual trend, and that's something worth monitoring. Also, what we see in gold and alternatives to, you know, we've seen a skyrocketing actually today with, I think gold hit a new high. So anecdotally out there,
so people are moving towards gold for more stability.
I mean, I think there is greater focus on the prevalence of the U.S. dollar in portfolios, and that's now more of an active question that people are asking.
Got it. Lastly, you know, since you mentioned stablecoins, I have to ask you, do you think there is a path to global recognition of stablecoins and crypto between governments, and is it going to be more necessary going forward?
So the stablecoin market has grown significantly. It's over, I think, roughly 300 billion, 315 billion today. Some projections by 2030 put it into $3 to $4 trillion dollar range. That's obviously extraordinary growth. I think different jurisdictions will take different paths. Concurrently, I mean, the U.S., you've had regulatory clarity with respect to the Genius Act, which affects stablecoins. You've seen also regulation in the UAE, in Singapore, and in Hong Kong as well. So you are having these regulatory pieces come together in a supportive way. But at the same time, you have other jurisdictions that are looking at alternatives to stablecoins, such as central bank digital currencies. I think the bottom line is that the financial system continues to digitalize, and that is a secular trend, and that will continue. My sense is different parts of the world will choose different paths, and that may either enhance connectivity or it may actually drive some additional fragmentation. We have to see.
Great. On that note, thank you very much, Matthew, for talking to us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.